Hey there, everyone. Sarah Brown Wessling here, and looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you talking about what I know we all must be struggling with on some level, which is how to get our students talking in online discussions. So I don't know if you are like me at all, but I kind of imagine that just because my students are digital natives, that hopping on a video conference call should just be really intuitive to them. But I think it's more like what happens to us when we listen to our own voices on a voicemail message and we kind of cringe because we're not quite sure what it is that we're hearing. I think this is what's happening to our students, right? Just because our students are on Snapchat and TikTok all the time and they're seeing their faces all the time, I don't think that means that they are ready and feel comfortable in a video conference. I think they're actually different. So let's talk about some of the foundational things that we can do to make sure our students feel confident and comfortable in these video conferences and discussions. So I think we have to build on the relationships that we've already started cultivating, but I also think we have to remember that starting online discussions is like starting the first day of school all over again. So just like many of us do on the first day or two of school, we want to make sure we hear every student's voice. We've got to find a way to have that happen in these online discussions too, right? We have to help our students cross that threshold from just kind of being present into being active. And that's going to happen in a lot of kind of deliberate ways. And in order for us to do this, we have to really think about our scaffolds. And I think we have to primarily think about two kinds of scaffolding in order to have these kinds of conversations, right? It's scaffolds with content and engagement. So let's jump to this content here. So here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about how we want our students to move from the concrete to the abstract when it comes to content, that we need them to start with something that's really accessible before we start asking them to think about and deal with some of that content that is more abstract and less accessible. In addition to that, we also want to scaffold our engagement. So we want to start with low risk and we want to move to higher risk engagement asks of our students. So let's kind of dive into these with a little bit more specificity. And I actually want to start with those engagement strategies, right? So those moments where we're moving from low risk to higher risk. So in order to start this, the place that I think we have to start is by asking our students to engage in reactions. Reactions can be with emojis or icons. Some of your video conferencing tools may already have these built in, and this is a great place to start, right? So we're thinking about also making sure that every student says hello. If you have a chat window or if they're on mute and you want them to come off mute and they just say hello, even if they all know each other, everybody already knows each other because they've been together before. It's really important, again, to remember this is like the first day of school again. And even if you've been in the middle of these video conferences for a while and they aren't working the way you'd hoped, there is nothing wrong with starting, having a new first day and just getting everybody to talk. But again, we want it to start with that really low risk engagement. From there, we want our students to move from reactions to answers. So when we're thinking about having students give answers, you can think about creating polls. You can think about creating yes or no questions. You can think about creating either or questions. And even when you're doing this, if there's a way for students to chat their answers or to type their responses rather than going off mute and saying them out loud, this is a great time to do that, right? Because remember, we're working from low risk to higher risk, and we want to scaffold this And if we can scaffold it within one discussion, that's fantastic. But sometimes you might have to scaffold this over a series of discussions, and there is nothing wrong with that. So the next phase in kind of easing into engagement is to move from reactions to answers up to responses. Okay. So here's what we want students to do. When we're asking them to respond, we are asking them to do some thinking and processing, but we have to give them time to do this thinking and processing. And so I would really suggest that in order for this to happen, that our students are given opportunities, whether it is doing some writing on a scratch piece of paper right in front of them, whether it is just some quiet time, whether it's an activity that's a little outside the discussion window. And then we're asking them to bring that back. If you want students to give responses where they have thought through, some ideas, we have to give them time. So this is really part of that scaffolding, right? That time and easing into this is important because you got a lot of students who are going to want to process their thoughts, and they're going to want to get them just perfect before they hit unmute and start to share. As we are thinking about easing into engagement and building some confidence, got a couple of kind of methods for us to think about. One is to really consider using small groups. If you have the capacity in your video conferencing tool to create small groups or breakout groups, you want to do this, okay? Here's one of the reasons why this is so important. I'm guessing that in your actual face-to-face classrooms, a lot of you have students do things like turn and talk, work in a small group, talk to the person next to you, share out to the large class. If we just go from teacher talk to student response, and we have forgotten the kinds of processing time that we have built in for our students, we are not going to set them up for success, right? They're going to feel like they're going from low risk to super high risk instead of making that gradual increase. So using those small groups really helps them process. Here are some ways to think about small groups. One that I really like to use is an asynchronous discussion. I actually use this on Google Docs. It's a shared document, and I'll create this ahead of time so that students will all have access to it. So this particular idea is the notion that you are going to create these boxes. This is called first come, first served discussion group. So the first 4 students that show up to the document are in that orange group. The next 4 students that show up in this document are in this blue group. And essentially what happens then is the students have time to process either a question or a response ahead of time. So it can be before class, it can be within class, but they're doing some processing time before we're asking them to share it with the whole group. So here is the asynchronous discussion with Google Docs. Another idea is also with Google Docs, and it's also using tables. I call this the graffiti wall conversation. And you can see here that what a graffiti wall conversation is just a bunch of different boxes. Every student then takes a different font. They get to kind of choose their own font. A lot of times they like that. And then you pose a question. Everybody has time to respond. And then when they're responding in those boxes, what happens is they're having that thinking time, that processing time that once again becomes so crucial for students to go from quiet to interactive. So that is the graffiti wall. The next one is also using another shared document. This is using shared Google slide deck. And for this one, oftentimes what I'll do is I will pose a question or a prompt, put that on the top slide that you can see here, and then give students each a different slide. And each student gets an opportunity then to answer that prompt on their slide through images, through quotes, through examples. They can pull a video. And again, what you're doing here is instead of just saying, here's your prompt, now you all talk and we can have this discussion, we're really building in this thinking time, processing time, knowing that processing time is also the learning time, right? And so what we have to kind of maybe shift in our minds is that if we want some good discussion, we're going to have to probably increase the length of processing time in order to get really quality discussion. So there is creating a slide in order to explain something. So now let's move from thinking about scaffolding those engagement strategies into progressing into content, right? Moving again from that concrete level content into the more abstract. So I just want to say this as I start to talk about this. One of my fundamental beliefs about discussion is that discussions are about discovery, not proving what you know. So if you are walking into a discussion, especially an online discussion, with the hope that this is going to be an opportunity for students to prove what they know, you're probably going to be disappointed. So if we shift that kind of mentality and really open it up to discussions about discovery and processing, then I think we're going to feel a lot stronger about what we're going to get. All right, so progressing into content, remember we're going to start with the concrete. So I'm going to just offer some question stems here that might be helpful when you are thinking about content and questions that are going to really help students in that concrete way. So you may ask questions like, what do you know for sure? This helps them just focus on something they know for sure, right? Lower risk. Can you find an example of you fill in the blank, right? Again, that's kind of concrete content. I also love this question. What are 3 things that you've learned between the last time we talked and now? And again, it creates the opportunity for students to all respond. Nobody has to worry about there being like a definitively right or wrong answer. And that can kind of certainly create more confidence in students. So we're going to move from the concrete and we're going to move really into trying to get, again, reactions from students, right? So now in terms of, before we were talking about reactions in terms of their engagement, now we're talking about a reaction in terms of their reactions to their content. So you could ask some questions like, how did you react to fill in the blank through the assignment, whatever that might be? Would you have, so this is the kind of question where you might pose and you might ask about, maybe it's a character. Would you have done what this character did? Maybe you've just done a social studies lesson and you've just read about a certain figure in history or in current events. And you can ask, would you have said this? Would you have reacted in this way? You can also extend this a little bit and kind of ask, do you think it's fair for, and fill in the blank, take that from your content, whatever your content is that you're studying. These are just some examples to kind of get you thinking about ways to get students to react. Then once we're getting students to react, we are ultimately, again, working towards those responses. So here are a couple of sentence stems. You might ask something like, if you were to compare blank to blank, what would you find? What would you think? What did you think about? Fill in the blank. What question did this make you think about? So whatever your content or your learning is, what question did this make you think about? Turn this on to the students, ask them to start posing questions. It can be a really powerful tool as well. So in all of these, right, what we're ultimately working towards is matching engagement and content. So you can see here all of the different ways that we can match the scaffolds in engagement with those scaffolds in content. And really then you get to use your best ideas to figure out how to help your students really engage in this online learning. Finally, I just want to say this is tough work, right? What we're asking you to do is tough work. So as you're thinking about this, remember to keep those safe spaces that you have created in your face-to-face classrooms. You have to create and keep those safe spaces online. So whether that means going over norms or discussion dispositions, now's the time to do it. Keep building those relationships. And remember, this is a gradual release. Extend grace to yourself, to your students. And I know you all have some fantastic online discussions ahead. Take care, everybody.